stocks, paper assets, real estate, and the dollar is going to crash. Pay attention right now, because if you're still believing in the power of the dollar, you're in serious trouble.
The FDIC, in essence, is a scam. The Great Depression looked like a walk in the park when these banks failed.
You and me and everybody else runs in there and say, we want our money back, but there's no money there.
Our biggest asset is debt on our children. Gold is the only other tier one asset, but they don't really tell us this. You have to dig and dig and dig to find it.
If you just pretend that you'll be saved by some kind of magical, your college degree is going to save you, I'll pray for you tonight, because you're in serious trouble, because we don't save dollars, we save gold and silver coinage, and we don't keep it in this country. And I said, we do everything legally, but we just don't save the dollar. One of the things that the Bitcoin or the crypto guys get on about gold, they argue which is better, gold or Bitcoin and all that. I think they're worthless arguments. I was blown away when I first heard you talking about the BRICS, because I heard about the BRICS about 10 years ago. And the BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now Saudi Arabia. And your insights to what's going on macro behind Biden's back is eye-opening. And so that's why I'd like to get in today, why you should be right now having gold, silver, and all these things in storage. So what's the BRICS, and why is it so important? And what's happening behind, or as it could be in collusion with the Biden crime family, you never know. Well, and plus this war in Ukraine. So what is the BRICS and why are you so concerned about it?
I'm concerned about the BRICS because of what is happening in this country, because of the weaponizing of the dollar, because the decisions that this administration has made. I believe we have, of course, the majority of the world, really, outside of the Western influence, the countries in the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, the United States, Japan, the rest of the world is coalescing together in a chorus of unity against the West. And
right. What you're saying is they're pissed off and they're not going to put up with the U.S. bullying anymore.
That's right. And I think they look at the West as being hypocritical. And when you weaponize the dollar as the world reserve currency, the way the United States did against Russia, you incentivize countries to find an alternative, wondering if they're going to be next on the chopping board. If they're next, that is going to be a country that is viewed as not parallel or aligned to U.S. interests. What does that mean? And how many countries have the U.S. sanctioned along the way, cut off their access to SWIFT? And I think that's having consequences to where we see not only the BRICS, but the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which represents pretty darn close to 60% of human population, 60% of the Eurasian landmass, the Belt Road Initiative, the BRICS, as we mentioned, the Eurasian Economic Union, all of these countries. And if you look, most of the countries involved in these are all part of these same entities. They're rallying together against us, against the West, and they're doing so by accumulating tremendous amount of commodities. Turkey, as an example, imported more gold than any country in the world last year, and they have formally applied for BRICS. In January, Turkey imported 58.3 tons of gold from Switzerland. That is by far the most of any month on records going back to 2012, according to Swiss customs data. So these countries are using commodities like gold as a vehicle that will allow everyone equal footing at the table. And I think that's exactly what they're going to do, using, if I had to guess, the success of the 4-year, let's call it beta test of the Chinese digital yuan, which has shown that it's effective and that it works to the tune of over 25 billion in settlements as the rails to show the immutability and the veracity of what each one of these countries that is joining this growing chorus of countries will pledge to a system that gives them equal say at the table.
Right.
And a country like Turkey is exactly the one to show that this is exactly what they're all doing. Well, what gives the dollar its world reserve status is the fact that every country on the planet has had to own dollars since 1954 in order to buy oil. And that was the deal that we struck with the Saudi Kingdom and by extension, OPEC. And it's important to note that the Belt Road Initiative, which is the largest infrastructure project in human history, every one of the 13 producing OPEC countries on the Belt Road, they are all lining up on the same side of the ledger. So when Saudi Arabia, as we've talked about before, first was signed a joint operation agreement with Russia, I was screaming in September of 2021, that's it. Knowing that they would join BRICS, it became very obvious that this would happen, and indeed they did. They have formally applied for BRICS, and if you realize that what has given the dollar this synthetic demand globally is the need to accumulate it to buy oil, if everyone doesn't need to hold dollars anymore because OPEC decides to open up oil production to other currencies, it is a massive, massive deal. And what did Saudi Arabia just tell us in Davos 2-3 weeks ago? We are open to accepting other currencies for oil. So this is a massive deal. Really, it's a massive deal. What it does is it will put a knife right in the heart of the US dollar and its synthetic demand and its hegemony on a global stage. It's a huge, huge, huge deal.
So let me give some dates. But in 1974 the deal was cut that the world would have to buy oil in US dollars. And that's what Andy's talking about. They're all saying right now, adios dollars. And Andy's saying 60% today of the world's population will stop using the US dollar. And that's what gives us power. So for those of you who are saving those fake dollars, you're in serious trouble right now. And that's why all these years we don't save dollars. We save gold coins and silver coins stored someplace else, because that is the challenge with gold and silver as a storage. So I want you to understand this. This goes back to what they always say at school: go to school, get a good job, work hard, pay taxes, and save money and invest in the stock market. And that's what we're talking about now. That dollar gave the power to the stock market to go through the roof. And when they talk about the bubble, the 3 times bubble, it's stocks, paper assets, real estate, and the dollar is going to crash. So all you out there, savers out there, I would pay attention right now. Because if you're still believing in the power of the dollar, you're in serious trouble.
Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, I believe is what it stands for. It's the organization that backs all the deposits held at the banks in the United States, to which there's over $9 trillion in deposits being backed by a few $100 billion in assets or in cash by the FDIC. In essence, it's a scam. They don't have enough money to back the deposits, and people need to understand this. And thanks to the leverage that has been created, this will make the Great Depression look like a walk in the park when these banks fail, because they are all so leveraged. They have removed all the reserve requirements ever since the pandemic. And so when you deposit money in the bank, they don't hold it. Heck, right now, they would take your deposit. If you know this, even though interest rates have gone up, what you get in the banks is still a fraction of a percent.
Andy, what FDIC is concerned about is a run on the bank. In other words, you and me and everybody else runs in there and they say, we want our money back, but there's no money there.
That's right. In fact, if you give them $100,000, they're not going to leave that in there. They'll go buy 3-month treasuries earning 4% instead of leaving it in the bank as a reserve. They were allowed to relinquish all reserve requirements during the pandemic. And so this has created a problem. The FDIC Systemic Resolution Advisory Committee had a meeting in November that leaked out to YouTube. And the meeting, they basically said, listen, the members of this committee who realize that the public has more faith in the credit of the banking system than we do here in this committee, this is a problem that the public needs to understand, that there will be bail-ins and runs on the bank. The institutions, the banks already know that. In 2008, when the banks went upside down based upon the poor decisions that they made, the public, the taxpayers, bailed out the banks. The money that was given to them by the government is funded by the taxpayer. That's been made illegal. So they can't be bailed out anymore by us taxpayers. Instead, they get bailed in by the depositors of the bank who are now considered unsecured creditors. Meaning, just like they did in Cyprus. In Cyprus, anyone who had over $100,000, that money over $100,000 was given into the bank like in bankruptcy protection, where the money was used to make the bank whole and any money left over would be given back out to the depositors, or shares of a defunct bank given back out to the depositors in a pro fashion. In other words,
I'm going to explain that, okay? If you have savings in, let's say, Bank of America, and it requires a bail-in, they're going to keep your money and give you these fake assets called shares in Bank of America. In other words, you get hosed. So we have this thing. What happened at that FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, that got leaked? They said, ladies and gentlemen, I think there's going to be a run on our banks. In other words, they're going to yank our money out, and that means all you savers out there, you good little boys and girls, you will become owners of the bank. They're going to give you stocks instead of your cash.
That's exactly right. And they say, not only do the institutions know this is coming, that the people need to understand that bailouts are gone and bail-ins are now the order of the day. But they were very succinct in saying, the problem is if we tell the public this, the unintended consequences will incite a run on the banks. And this is a very scary deal. In fact, when I saw it for the first time in terms of what we believe to be true, I was very, very, very concerned about my own personal money in the bank. To the point where I've been buying gold and silver every 2 weeks for 34 years. I'm ready to go buy a whole lot more just because I don't want money in the banks, because they're telling us it's coming and the banks know it and the people need to know it, but we really don't want to let them know it because there will be unintended consequences. It will only incite and expedite this run on the banks, which they deem as inevitable. I talk a lot about what's happening around the world and globally as it pertains to the coalition of countries joining together against the West. But if you were looking at the West from across the pond, what do you see? You see a country that they just admitted that Social Security is $75.9 trillion underfunded. IOUs, $75.9 trillion. A trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. And that's not counted against a $31 trillion debt. So you're already over 100 trillion there. You got Medicare, Medicaid, and government military pensions, which push us to over $130 trillion. But by their own admission in the 2022 U.S. balance sheet, do you know what they tell us is their largest single asset, which represents 38.4% of federal assets? Do either of you know what the largest asset is in the United States? Most people don't get it. It's a liability against the children in this country, yet they consider it an asset. We are a country, the land of the free, the home of the brave, the world reserve currency, and our biggest asset is debt on our children. The U.S. is depleting and destroying the very resources that has made it so powerful in the first place. Freedom, capitalism, reputation, military strength, can go on and on and on. It's unbelievable the things that are happening. A country where $5 billion to build a border wall to stop fentanyl from coming in and poisoning our children, which is the last I heard, the greatest cause of death amongst teenagers right now in this country is fentanyl poisoning. But $114 billion to the Ukraine is okay. Giving pensions to the Ukrainian government, where we pay $740 billion in interest on the debt last year. We have to borrow money to pay interest on the debt to which we borrowed in the first place. It's absolutely, completely, and totally upside down what's happening in this country. And when you look at the FDIC saying there's going to be run bank, well, it's becoming very obvious. We're destroying the value of the dollar, and the world around us understands this. We are borrowing money that we don't have. We're spending it in ways that are just absolutely, completely, totally upside down, while our cities and the crumbling infrastructure around us is making us wonder who's going to come and rescue the bridges and the railways and the roads and the infrastructure in this country that is so in need of repair. And yet instead we borrow money to fight a war that is enriching the military industrial complex, but impoverishing this country. And at the same time, the people around the world understand exactly what we are doing. We are inflating away the dollar, and we are bullying the rest of the world by weaponizing the dollar and saying, if you don't do this, well, you're kicked out of the game. And I think this is why you are seeing what will amount to north of 80% of human population when you put it all together, the 60 plus countries that are already on the docket to join BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt Road Initiative, the Eurasian Economic Union. These entities are coalescing, and they are using commodities like gold, the tier one reserve asset, as deemed by the Bank of International Settlements in 2019. At the end of World War II, the dollar was anointed the only tier one reserve asset in the world. The dollar, at least as far as central banks are concerned, is a riskless asset, and it's tier one. And that's been the only tier one asset, that and US Treasuries, since the end of World War II. It would be used for collateral. If the Bank of England is trading with the Swiss National Bank, they wouldn't have used pounds or francs as collateral. They would use dollars or treasuries. Now they're telling us that gold is the only other tier one asset. But they don't really tell us this. You have to dig and dig and dig to find it. In Google, it'll pop right up like that. But maybe this explains why the central banks bought more gold in 2022 than in any year since 1967, the second most on record. Maybe this will explain why many of the countries that are applying to BRICS have massive percentages of their reserve assets in gold.
What Andy is saying is, before the last few years, they held U.S. bonds, treasuries.
Yes.
And now they're saying, we made a mistake. We better get out of these bonds and into gold and hard assets.
That's exactly right. And it's other OPEC producing countries too, and other countries that are moving away from the dollar. The Iraqi central bank, a country we just spent $1 trillion in to help the Iraqis, if that's what you really want to believe. Well, they just announced on Wednesday that for the first time they plan to allow trade from China to be settled in yuan instead of US dollars. That is the beginning of the end of dollar trading in Iraq. You saw the same thing in Iran, where their leader was the first Iranian president in years to visit China. They are all moving away from the West. And you can see this. It's the rallying cry of the hypocrisy and the bullying by the West that gets everyone to the table. But it will be a commodity-backed system. We've already been told that they will use commodities to back a new reserve currency. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization has told us they want to issue a gold-backed settlement currency for the entire Eurasian continent. These are all the same players. And basically what they're saying is that the only way that you give authenticity and validity to a system is to peg it to something that can't be inflated away. It's not going to be like the European Union, which was a great novel idea, but it didn't work because all the different cultures are moving in different directions, just like it would be with the BRICS. On one hand, you got Iraq and Iran both applying at the same time. You got Iran and Saudi Arabia. These countries don't like each other, but what? My enemy's enemy is my friend. Well, what if we all pledge commodities so we all get equal say at the table, equal footing? The BRICS nations, they rotate their presidency. Not one country has the presidency. It rotates. This year, it's in South Africa. They are a system that will be based upon cooperation, mutual benefit, and a pledging or pegging of commodities, I believe, to a distributed ledger technology to show the world, hey, here it is.
Is distributed ledger, is that blockchain?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
And so they will use blockchain to show what each country has pledged or pegged to the new system to give it veracity. And I think that's really where the tide will change. People I respect, like Rick Rule, a good friend of mine, said, well, it's hard when you look at the European Union as an example. It didn't work because they were pulling in different directions. I agree. But if you, underneath the whole system, you have commodities that each country pledges to the system, it will make it work. It will be the glue that holds it all together, I believe. And the rallying cries against the West, the destruction and the brain-dead monetary policy of the West and the mismanagement of the reserve currency and the weaponizing of it is what's making every country run the table. But the pledging of commodities, the only other tier one reserve asset in the world next to US dollars in particular, is exactly what they will use to pledge to make the system legitimate. And, you know, people say to me, why isn't gold going up? They bought more gold than at any time in the last 55 years. I asked my head trader, because we hedge our exposure to gold, meaning we use COMEX contracts to take the other side of the gold and silver that I have in my warehouse. In other words, if this is 1,000 ounces of gold in my warehouse, and this is 1,000 ounces on paper on COMEX, if I'm holding it here long in my warehouse, I'll sell it short on COMEX. Because if the price of what I'm holding in my warehouse goes down, it goes up commensurate on what I have on COMEX, and vice versa. So my holdings for my business are market neutral. So I asked him, how much money does it take to control a COMEX account, which is roughly $185,000 worth of gold? It's 100 ounces. He said, all we need to have in our margin account is $7,000. So if I'm a commercial bank or a central bank with $1 billion in my margin account, do you see the perception of reality that I can create? I can suppress the hell out of the price of gold and then scoop it up when no one's looking, because everyone is so focused on the price. It allows the most sophisticated money in the world, the money that's closest to the information. Forget about the size of their wealth. It's bigger than all of our wealth combined, but they're closest to the information and they know what's coming. So they suppress the paper market and drain the COMEX and the LBMA and all of the ETFs that are being drained by these entities of their physical metal. To the point, like in silver right now on COMEX, there's only 288 million ounces in the entire COMEX universe right now in silver, of which only 31 million of those ounces are backing the bars that are available for delivery. India imported 304 million ounces last year. They are using commodities as the way to de-dollarize, and they are using the Western suppression of these commodities, because what is gold and silver? Everything over the last 2 years has blown sky high in value, thanks to low interest rate and more money created in the last 4 years than in the history of the country preceding it. So what are they doing? Everything getting blown up, but why not gold and silver? Because it is the canary in the mine shaft.
Right.
It exposes the frailty of the system.
Correct.
And our adversaries, even if they are to our face friendly, are using this suppression on the Western markets to drain the system. They are using it against us. It's the ninjutsu move. They are using our leverage against us. And that's exactly what they're doing, allowing them to de-dollarize under the cover of price suppression.